thought SpongeBob was the most wholesome show on television? Think again. There's one episode so inappropriate, so disturbing, that Nickelodeon quietly yanked it from existence and pretended it never happened. We're talking about content so bad that parents organized boycotts, child psychologists issued warnings, and network executives had emergency meetings about their biggest cash cow. March 30th, 2002. That's the date SpongeBob SquarePants crossed a line so dark that 20 years later you still can't watch this episode anywhere. What was supposed to be a harmless story about Mr. Krabs feeling old turned into a tutorial on criminal behavior that had parents questioning what the hell their kids were learning from a cartoon sponge. Picture this: SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mr. Krabs breaking into women's houses to steal their underwear. Not making this up, that actually happened in a kids' show, and somehow multiple adults approved it, animated it, and aired it before anyone realized they'd created a felony instruction manual disguised as comedy. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Parents were horrified, women's rights groups were outraged. Legal experts were questioning how a children's network could broadcast content promoting breaking and entering, and for the first time in SpongeBob history, Nickelodeon did something they'd never done before. They made an episode disappear forever. So grab your Krabby Patties because I'm about to tell you exactly how one 11-minute episode almost destroyed the most successful cartoon franchise in television history. Life Crustacean wasn't just another wacky Bikini Bottom adventure. It was a creative disaster that revealed how tone-deaf the SpongeBob writing team had become. What started as a simple story about Mr. Krabs feeling old and wanting to recapture his youth turned into the most controversial 11 minutes in Nickelodeon history. Here's what made this episode different from every other SpongeBob storyline. Instead of the characters just getting into harmless mischief, they were actively planning and executing criminal behavior. But here's the kicker. The writers framed breaking and entering as a fun, bonding activity between friends. The episode starts innocently enough. Mr. Krabs is having a midlife crisis, feeling old and uncool compared to SpongeBob and Patrick's youthful energy. He asks them to help him feel young again by doing something wild and crazy. Sounds like typical SpongeBob setup, right? That's exactly what the writers thought. But then the story takes a hard left turn into felony territory. SpongeBob and Patrick decide that the most rebellious thing they can do is break into someone's house and steal women's underwear. They call it a panty raid, and suddenly your innocent cartoon sponge is teaching children that violating women's privacy is hilarious entertainment. The creators genuinely thought they were writing harmless college humor. They took a concept that might work in an adult comedy and dropped it into a show watched by millions of preschoolers. What they actually created was a step-by-step guide to sexual harassment disguised as friendship bonding. The network initially didn't catch the implications. Nickelodeon executives saw three beloved characters going on a mischievous adventure and approved it without considering what parents would think when their 5-year-olds started asking what a panty raid was. But once the episode aired, the phone calls started immediately, and they were not happy calls. The complaints started flooding in before the episode even finished its first broadcast. Parents were calling Nickelodeon, local news stations, and anyone who would listen about what they'd just watched their children absorb during Saturday morning cartoons. Here's what sent parents into a rage. The episode didn't just mention inappropriate behavior, it showed beloved characters actively planning and celebrating it. SpongeBob, the innocent optimist that millions of kids looked up to, was breaking into houses and stealing women's personal items while treating it like the ultimate adventure. The panty raid sequence was where everything went completely wrong. Viewers watched SpongeBob and Patrick convince Mr. Krabs that breaking into women's bedrooms and rifling through their private belongings was the key to feeling young and cool. The characters snuck through windows, searched through drawers, and collected underwear like trophies while laughing about their successful crime. But the scene that broke parents' minds? The moment when they realize whose house they've broken into, Mr. Krabs' own mother's house. Instead of being horrified that they'd violated his elderly mother's privacy, the characters find it hilarious. They're literally stealing an old woman's underwear and treating it like a punchline. One mother from Texas wrote to the network, "My 6-year-old son asked me what a panty raid was and why SpongeBob was taking ladies' underwear. How am I supposed to explain that his favorite cartoon character just committed a crime?" Another parent complained, "This episode taught my daughter that boys breaking into girls' rooms and taking their private things is normal behavior." Women's rights organizations weren't just offended, they were furious. The National Organization for Women issued a statement calling the episode a primer on sexual harassment and demanded its immediate removal from all future broadcasts. Legal experts started weighing in, pointing out that the episode was literally depicting breaking and entering, theft, and invasion of privacy as comedic entertainment for children. Child psychologists began raising alarms about the message being sent to young viewers. Dr. Patricia Williams, who specializes in media influence on children, explained that kids watching wouldn't understand the criminal implications. They'd just see their heroes having fun by violating women's boundaries. The network's phones didn't stop ringing for weeks, and major sponsors started asking uncomfortable questions about the content they were funding. What parents didn't know was that Life Crustacean had already caused internal debates at Nickelodeon months before it aired. The writers, led by series creator Steven Hillenburg, were pushing boundaries they'd never approached before, and warning signs were everywhere. The original script was even worse than what made it to air. Early drafts included more explicit references to the characters' criminal behavior, with SpongeBob and Patrick comparing their raid to other illegal activities they could try. The final version was actually toned down after voice actors expressed concerns during recording sessions. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, later admitted he felt uncomfortable recording some of the dialogue. He reportedly asked writers during sessions, "Are we sure SpongeBob should be teaching kids to break into houses?" But by then, the episode was too far into production to make major changes without massive costs. The most telling behind-the-scenes moment came during the animation review process. Several animators raised concerns about drawing beloved characters committing crimes, but production deadlines meant changes would delay the entire season. One animator later described the experience as accidentally creating a how-to guide for stalkers. The episode underwent standard content review and was approved by multiple executives. Either nobody understood the implications of what they were watching, or they did understand and approved it anyway. Both possibilities are equally disturbing. Network executives later claimed they thought the panty raid concept was an innocent throwback to harmless college pranks, completely missing how it would look to parents watching with their children. One former Nickelodeon executive, speaking anonymously years later, admitted, "We got so caught up in pushing creative boundaries that we forgot we were making content for kindergartners." The writing was on the wall during production, but nobody wanted to admit they'd created a disaster until angry parents forced their hand. Here's where the controversy got truly serious. Legal experts and child safety advocates started analyzing the episode's impact, and their findings were damaging to both Nickelodeon and the SpongeBob brand. The core issue wasn't just inappropriate content, it was the criminal behavior being presented as harmless fun. Attorney Sarah Martinez, who specializes in children's media law, published an analysis explaining that the episode depicted multiple felonies: breaking and entering, theft, and invasion of privacy. More disturbing, it showed these crimes being committed against women specifically, with their personal undergarments as trophies. Child development experts documented behavioral changes in young viewers after the episode aired. Parents reported their children asking about panty raids, attempting to sneak into siblings' rooms, and showing increased interest in women's underwear. Dr. Michael Chen, a pediatric psychologist, explained that children watching couldn't separate the criminal aspects from the fun adventure aspects. They just saw their heroes having a great time violating boundaries. But the most damaging analysis came from gender studies experts who identified the episode as accidentally promoting sexual harassment culture. Professor Linda Rodriguez from UC Berkeley wrote, "The episode teaches young boys that women's privacy doesn't matter, that their personal items are fair game for male entertainment, and that violating female spaces is a bonding activity between friends." Women's safety organizations began using the episode as an example of how media normalizes predatory behavior in children. The fact that the characters faced no consequences for their actions sent the message that this behavior was acceptable, even admirable. Religious groups joined the backlash, with several major denominations issuing statements about the episode promoting theft and disrespecting women. The Catholic Conference called it morally objectionable content disguised as children's entertainment. The psychological damage was spreading beyond individual families. Entire communities were questioning whether SpongeBob was appropriate for children anymore. School districts began reviewing their policies about SpongeBob merchandise and references in educational materials. International broadcasters started expressing concerns about airing the episode, with several countries' broadcasting standards authorities launching investigations into the content. The network response was unprecedented in children's television history. Within 3 weeks of the episode's initial broadcast, Nickelodeon made a decision they'd never made before. They quietly pulled Life Crustacean from all future programming and pretended it had never existed. There was no official announcement, no explanation to fans, and no acknowledgement that anything had happened. The episode content guidelines, specifically because of this episode, mandatory criminal background checks for all storylines, child psychology consultants for every script, and zero tolerance for content depicting illegal behavior. The industry impact was massive. Other children's networks implemented similar content restrictions, and animation studios began hiring legal consultants to review scripts before production. The era of boundary-pushing children's television effectively ended with this episode. But here's the strangest twist. The episode has become legendary among adult SpongeBob fans precisely because it was banned. Online communities trade bootleg copies like forbidden contraband, and it's become the lost episode that proves how edgy SpongeBob used to be before corporate sanitization. Today, 20 years later, Life Crustacean remains completely unavailable through any official channels. It's not on Paramount Plus, not in DVD collections, and not in international broadcasts. Nickelodeon has spent 2 decades pretending this episode doesn't exist, making it possibly the most successfully censored piece of children's media in television history. So what do you think? Was Nickelodeon right to ban this episode forever? Or should parents have just explained why the behavior was wrong? Have you ever seen this banned episode, or did you grow up never knowing it existed? Drop your thoughts in the comments, especially if you remember the controversy when it happened. And if you want more stories about banned episodes, censored content, and the dark secrets behind your favorite childhood shows, smash that subscribe button, because I've got a whole library of forbidden television history to uncover. Trust me, the rabbit hole of banned cartoon content goes way deeper than you think.